I committed a mortal sin, but still went up for receiving the Holy Eucharist. I did not go to confession yet. Was it wrong of me? So if we are in the state of mortal sin, if we're certain that we committed a mortal sin, we should not approach to receive communion. We should go to confession first, and then afterwards receive communion. And the reason is that the reason for that it comes from St. Paul in the letter to the Corinthians, First Corinthians, I think it's chapter 11. He talks about those who eat of the flesh of Christ unworthily, eat unto their condemnation. That actually not receiving or receiving when we are not in the state of grace is actually an act of sacrilege, and so it's better not to receive, but rather go to confession first. And kind of within the sacramental order, why that makes sense, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this, that each of the sacraments have their own purpose for our own growth in grace, but there are certain sacraments that are called the sacraments of the living. And those are for those who are in the state of grace. And so if we're in the state of grace, we can receive those sacraments like communion, marriage, holy orders, confirmation. And that's it. It's those are the sacraments of the living. And then the sacraments that are referred to as the dead is for baptism, confession, and anointing of the sick. Those are ones that, if received properly, also forgive mortal sins. And so the Eucharist specifically is the bread of wayfarers is what it's referred to. And so it's for those who are alive, right? You don't give food to someone who is dead in the same way you don't give communion to someone who's spiritually dead. And then when we receive that bread and we are in fact in the state of grace, then it strengthens us to continue to live that Christian life. And so that's kind of the whole mentality behind it. But very simply said, if you fall into mortal sin, go to confession first and then receive the Eucharist afterwards. Every once in a while, you'll run across a priest that'll say just make a perfect act of contrition and then you can go and receive. So that is a permission that is granted only to priests to be able to do that. It's not granted to anybody else. And the reason why it's granted to priests is that if a priest commits a mortal sin, and then a whole community is waiting on him to offer mass so that they can fulfill their Sunday obligation, or so that they can receive communion, or whatever it may be, then it's actually better for the priest to do his best to make a perfect act of contrition, which is pretty much impossible when you're in the state of mortal sin, because a perfect act of contrition includes the life of grace within a person. It's that you actually have to love God. You have to be contrite with theological charity, which is the love of God that comes only with the life of grace. And so it's an almost impossible thing to do, but the church just kind of says, you know what, give it your best shot and then get out there and offer mass because the people need it, and then get to confession as soon as you can. But people make that mistake thinking that, well, it's allowed for priests, therefore it's allowed for everybody. But the priest, when he offers mass, he has to receive communion. That's part of the rite of the mass. But for everybody else, if we just attend a mass, we don't have to receive communion. And so for that reason, it's never necessary for us to receive communion. And therefore we never need to make that kind of attempt at a perfect act of contrition. We need to go to the sacrament of confession and there receive God's grace and then be prepared to receive communion.